Chapter 28 Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin. Read by Dan McLaughlin. Chapter 28 Alice Insists. Alice swept through the castle doors, surrounded by a flurry of servants who seemed to have been deployed specifically to delay her. The front hall, impressive with its grand staircase, seemed unusually crowded, and she wondered whether this was due to the sensational nature of her arrival, or it was the result of some hasty planning by Mrs. Downs. A glance past the maids and footmen, so anxious to be of service to Lady Alice, showed the housekeeper was lurking nearby. She had to remind herself that Mrs. Downs didn't know who Alice had been visiting. Not yet. She was probably only waiting for a chance to once again assume her role as guardian of the way things ought to be done, and to correct any misguided attempts from Alice to behave in an unladylike way. But Alice wasn't in the mood for any of that. In a display of shocking independence, she took off her own gloves. Unfortunately, any desire to slap them dramatically on a nearby table was thwarted by a well-trained maid who intercepted them with a dutiful curtsy. "Thank you," said Alice, her righteous anger superseded by innate good manners. She took another deep breath, ready to make some equally dramatic gesture, but another servant was already reaching to help her take off the lovely fitted carriage cloak. She had barely enough time to breathe before someone else carefully divested her of the packet of swan feather quills, and yet another person thoughtfully brushed the travel dust from her skirts. "Fine, thank you," she finally managed to say, struggling to maintain the energy of her arrival. "My brother, Lord Latimer, and the ladies are in the music room," said Mrs. Downs. "Then I'll go to him at once," said Alice, as if words alone could break her out of the shell of fluttering helpers. But the housekeeper cleared her throat meaningfully. "You'll want to change your gown, Lady Alice," she said. Alice had a brief fantasy of ignoring her, simply brushing past Mrs. Downs and barreling down the corridor. But she didn't. Mrs. Downs seemed anxious to resume the power struggle they'd had earlier, but that felt years away to Alice, and she should know. "Change my dress? Again, she said. Yes, my lady, said Mrs. Downs firmly. You are in no state to properly greet your guest after what was clearly an arduous journey from the village. A young lady of quality must retire to her chambers and change rather than presenting herself in all her dirt. Alice fumed, and Miss Pocket interposed. The other ladies will notice, Miss Alice, the maid said in an under voice, that you're wearing your carriage dress. I understand your hurry, but it will seem odd to them and distracting. Alice opened her mouth to say something blistering, then paused to consider the ramifications. She drew a deep breath, reflected that Miss Pocket had been a loyal and true friend, as well as knowing what to do with her hair, and decided that it was in her best interest to let herself be persuaded. However, she meant to do it on her own terms. I am going to my brother, she said firmly, but calmly. Whatever you can do to repair my looks in the time I walk from here to the music room is what will have to suffice. You will not change clothes in the corridor, gasped Mrs. Downs, and her look of scandalized horror made Alice feel quite a bit better about her decision. You ought to be wearing morning dress to greet your guests. I have every faith in Miss Pocket, said Alice, and her ability to make me more, morning-ish to cover for that less than rousing finish. Alice took action and the first few steps to the music room, allowing herself a slight smile of triumph as Mrs. Downs stepped aside. Very well, my lady, Miss Pocket said. Walking alongside Alice, she tossed aside the traveling bonnet and began to do what she could to repair the damage to Alice's appearance. The footmen wisely took their leave, but Miss Pocket began to hurl instructions as much at Alice as at the maids who followed in her wake. Allow me to unfasten these buttons here. Yes, and step out of your shoes. Thank you. Take Lady Alice's coat to her chamber and bring instead the half-dress of fawn-colored wool. You, please run to the dowager's chamber and bring the ecru scarf and the matching cap. And you, hurry and fetch the chocolate-colored slippers from Lady Alice's closet. Go. At the same time, Alice modified her stride to accommodate the flurry of activity. As she slowly walked down the hall, she felt she had a new understanding of what it must be like to be a Grand Prix car during a pit stop. Just as they reached the music room, the attendants fell away, panting, and looked at Alice, clearly pleased with their efforts. Miss Pocket was the last to fall away, unable to resist making the last few adjustments to Alice. "How do I look?" asked Alice, knowing she'd been transformed from teal-colored traveler to fawn-colored hostess in almost the blink of an eye. She trusted Miss Pocket well enough that she didn't even need to ask for a mirror. Summing up a phrase she probably hadn't used since she had herself time traveled, Miss Pocket muttered, "Good enough for government work." Alice laughed, and though she addressed herself to Miss Pocket, she included all the breathless maids in her smile. "I know it isn't what you're used to," she said, "but time is of the essence, really. I'm grateful to you all," she said. "You ladies are fantastic. Thank you." She could tell the maids appreciated the compliment, though they said nothing. They curtsied and were clearly proud of their work. The door was opened, and Alice swept into the music room. All eyes turned to her, and everyone rose to their feet as if they couldn't help it. Alice felt magnetic. She knew she looked good, knew she had solid information, and was ready to hold their attention. "Brian," she said, "good morning. Ladies, good morning to you as well, and thank you for not tearing apart my brother to shreds when you found him here. Especially you, Lady Iris." "What a remarkable family," said Lady Iris. "Your brother said much the same thing when he came through the door." "And what a remarkable outfit," said Lenora. "Part traveling, part mourning." The looks the ladies gave Alice were openly appraising. After a moment, a consensus was formed. "Refreshingly original," said Iris, nodding. "It looks so natural," said Lenora, "like it was just thrown together," said Eliza. "But the overall effect is stunning, ingenious," approved Iris. "It suits you well, Alice." "We're still not quite sure who you are or what folly we are indulging," added Lenora, "but I have to admit I regret nothing about my visit to this castle. It has been quite some time since I have been so engaged." "And a castle that speaks. Congratulations to you, Lady Alice, for divining the true nature of the many creaks and groans and draughts of Castle Dartmoor, Eliza added warmly. Alice felt a quick sting of disappointment as she realized she had missed the big reveal. Brian had done the work for her. The others already knew the truth about the house. She had been looking forward to astonishing them with the news. The castle could no longer be her special friend, but she brushed that thought aside. The sensible part of Alice knew that knowing the house was cognizant was probably a very large part why the ladies were still there. She could still add her private congratulations to Eliza's. After all, she had been the first to discover the consciousness of the house. "Hello, Carl," she said. Somewhere a shutter banged and the curtains billowed and the chimney puffed. Alice was secretly quite pleased to get such an obvious welcome. She was still Carl's favorite. Her joy fled when she looked over at her brother, holding a half-empty glass with both hands. "Brian," she said, "you don't look well." "I'm okay." He shook his head, clearly not wanting to dwell on his illness. "The old coot say anything?" Brian looked up hopefully. Alice swept further into the room and took a seat upon an elegantly carved chair, and with a gesture that would have done Lady Iris proud, invited the others to sit as well. She noted with delight that Iris seemed to have assigned herself the role of Brian's chief attendant, and hid a satisfied smile. The house creaked in an encouraging manner as Alice began to speak. "I learned a lot during my visit. Our friend, the old coot, or rather, good Master Sharp, is eccentric, but I definitely got the sense that he knew what he was talking about. He said we'd have to do more if we wanted to energize the castle sufficiently for it to return home." Somewhere a shutter banged. 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for maybe or try again, Brian chanted, not quite under his breath. Alice couldn't tell whether this was for his own benefit, to get the pattern ingrained through the fog of his brain, or if it was intended as a helpful reminder to the ladies. However, Lenora understood Alice right away. "You mean there are other terms to the bargain you must fulfill before you can return home?" she demanded. "Yes, there are," said Alice. Brian looked at her weakly. "Well, what are they?" He took another deep drink of water. Absently, Iris took the glass from his hand and refilled it. Alice said, "Brian, it's what we already thought. You and I are not the only ones who have been sent here. There are others, and, like you, some of them have been given a riddle to solve before they can return home. Master Sharp told me that we can only return home when all the riddles have been solved. He said, while one remains, all must remain, and the house can know no peace." Just outside, a shutter banged loudly. And while I was there, I learned that Carl wasn't the author of those riddles. Whatever else he's done, we can't blame him for the awfulness of the poems. Again, a shutter banged loudly enough to make Eliza jump. "Hush, Carl," Alice said soothingly. She stroked the sofa she was sitting on as if it were a very large dog, and Carl settled. Brian and the ladies listened intently to her every word. And I learned that, like Brian and myself, Carl the castle is also trapped out of his own place in time. He's been here years and years, but I think there's a home, some place that he would like to get to. If we can't help him, Carl will be trapped on these cliffs forever." The windows rattled in their frame as the whole castle shivered. "Of course," admitted Alice, "Master Sharp was talking like a pirate when he said it, so I took his decree with a grain of salt." "Like a pirate?" echoed Brian, clearly interested. In his stupor, he seemed able to concentrate on only one thing at a time. Inwardly cursing herself for mentioning a distracting detail to him, Alice knew that for Brian to move on, she would have to elaborate. She curled her index finger around and in mimicry of a hook and said, "Aye, matey, swab the duck, or Nicky Noo." His sister's attempt at pirate speak seemed to rally Brian to reply in kind. "Captain, have ye seen the mizzen mast?" he said. Alice's heart ached to see how ill Brian looked, pale and clammy, and with such dark shadows under his eyes. She didn't have it in her to deny her brother the comfort of the punchline. "Nay, I have not. Where be the mizzen mast?" "I don't know, Captain," he crowed. "It be mizzen. Hurdy, hur, hur, hur. What an extraordinary family, said Iris, ostensibly speaking to Lenora. Is poor acting a regimen taught in their nursery, do you think? Or is it something about being siblings? She asked dryly, not really expecting an answer. Eliza choked on a laugh. Brian, however, had moved on. Struck by a realization, he said, like Reg and his book. Reg, my lord. Lenora's tone was polite as she quickly moved her focus from Alice, the pirate, to this information that might be of more immediate importance. Is there another lord in residence that I am unaware of? Oh, no. Well, I don't know. I guess he could be. I didn't ask about where he came from. He's the guy who seems to know how all these buttons and collar things go. Reg, the dressing guy. Brian was waving his arms like he was trying to shake ants off his fingertips, a gesture not entirely recommended for someone holding a glass partially filled with water. As Lady Iris mopped up the spill, the other ladies turned as one to Alice, who resumed her role as oracle of Brian. He means his valet, she said. Yeah, he got a riddle too, and Alice and I figured it out. A riddle? Asked Eliza, interested. Yeah, we solved it before coming down to dinner last night, Brian said. Well, Brian did most of it, Alice admitted. Brian's willingness to share credit publicly was one of his most admirable qualities, and it felt good for Alice to reciprocate. She continued, I have been meaning to ask you, what was the exact riddle? I never heard the whole thing. Brian, who couldn't remember names, even to save his life, remembered riddles. He put on his reciting face. It was something like this. To the watch you must turn, to see the face of God you yearn. That book, that which you must find, describes a world which is finely designed. Iris and Lenora looked at each other blankly. It does sort of rhyme, began Lenora, speaking as if she were thinking out loud. A book about a watch? Said Iris. Oh, goodness gracious! Eliza gave a little laugh and touched her fingers to the base of her throat. Brian smiled at her, aware now of how much the shy girl who loved flowers, also enjoyed puzzles and puns. You know it, he said encouragingly. Blushing, Eliza nodded. The book is Natural Theology by William Paley, she said precisely. Brian and Alice clapped their hands and encouraged. She went on. Well, I find it comforting to think that everything has been created by a beneficent creator, and every plant and thing of creation has been made by a force of cunning goodness, like a watchmaker makes a watch. Indeed, my copy of that book is never far from me, for I study it almost daily. So saying, Eliza reached into her rectosole, the purse hanging from her wrist, and pulled out a book whose size nearly filled the bag. The house gave a low hum. It was a strange sound, one they had not heard before, and the five of them exchanged looks, unsure of whether or not to be concerned. The air had shifted, and they felt it, a sort of charge in the air, a vibration beneath their feet as the book was placed on a table. It was persistent, and at least to Alice and Brian, reminiscent of an engine somewhere slowly powering up. I hope that means something good, said Brian softly. Alice quickly said, Carl, even though you didn't write the riddles, do we have to solve all of them to get home? And do you need something like my book, the answer to the riddle, as the fuel for the journey? Asked Eliza, her face tight with concentration. Somewhere, a shutter banged and the curtains billowed. The vibration intensified. To Brian, Alice said, Reginald is like us from another time. So is Miss Pocket. But the one we need to talk to is Mrs. Downs. She's the one who wrote all the poems that people have been trying to solve. The housekeeper? Asked Lenora, incredulous. Yes, said Alice. Master Sharp had a copy of her letters in his shop, and the handwriting is the same. I don't know why she's been doing it, or what she knows about Carl, but clearly her riddles, these awful poems, are tied up with Carl and his ability to time travel. In unison, the shutters at the windows closed themselves and opened once again with a single solemn bang. Well then, said Iris firmly, it's clearly time to have a chat with Mrs. Downs. Brian laughed, giddy with renewed hope. As he drank his water, he wondered briefly whether he should have recited the full poem, but the house was humming. The book had been produced. He had gotten to do his pirate joke. Iris was with him, and he was happy to leave it at that. End of chapter 28. Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elan Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin. Read by Dan McLaughlin. The end.